The first Berlin escort. March 6, 1944. 26,000 feet over the Elbe, east of Brunswick. Frost rims the canopy. The oxygen mask hisses, and Lieutenant James Tex Lawson of the 362nd Fighter Squadron, 357th Fighter Group Leisten, East Anglia leans into a shallow bank, eyes scouring the gray-blue horizon. The contrails of the bomber stream stack in ragged tiers ahead, a white highway to a city the Luftwaffe had long promised Americans would never reach by daylight. His P-51B carries twin 108-gallon paper tanks under the wings, their seams trembling in the slipstream. He thumbs the mic. Blue 1 to blue flight fuel check. Clicks answer back. Laconic and tight, blue 2 green. Blue 3 green. Blue 4 green. Below and ahead. The first box of B-17's 1st Air Division drone east. Plexiglass noses glittering in the sun. You can almost feel the cold through the glass. The oil canning skin. The 4-beat rhythm of right cyclones. The target is the industrial belt around Berlin-Erkner and Oranienburg, ball bearings and engines. The iron lungs of the Reich. It is late morning on the first true American push to the German capital with full fighter cover from coast to target and back. For the men in the bomber boxes, it feels like a promise kept. For the men in fighters, it feels like a long fuse burning toward a powder magazine. Debden read to all escorts bandits climbing. 2 o'clock high. Crackles a voice Lawson knows, Colonel Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group. Further north, already mixing it up. Lawson wets his lips, tastes rubber and cold metal. The Packard-built Merlin in front of him, V1650-3, thrums at 2700 RPM. Its 2-stage supercharger breathing clean at altitude where the Allison would have gone wheezy. A British heart built in Detroit, bolts and bearings exact to the 10,000th. The spirit of a Rolls-Royce 60 series layered into American interchangeability. He eases the prop governor, trims a hair nose down to keep his speed in hand. Hold the drop tanks, his squadron leader reminds. We're still long of Berlin. The sky is a geometry of intentions, bomber boxes in stepped formations, Mustangs off the high quadrants, P-47s from the 56th further west. Trading range for brute speed and punch, and somewhere beyond the shining contrails. The Luftwaffe's answer, GG-11, JG-1, JG, 26, clawing upward from dispersal strips in Brandenburg and Saxony. The Germans have learned to meet the stream head-on, cannon fire raking the bomber noses, then quartering attacks from above and behind. They have counted on American fighters turning back, fuel-starved, somewhere near the German frontier. Today, the arithmetic has changed. Blue lead, contrails 9 high, coming in hot. Calls Blue 3. Lawson sees them a second later. Knife-thin scratches angling down, sun flashing on spinner and canopy. FWI under 90As with black and white Reich defense bands. BF 109G6s with bulged cowlings, a sky full of hard edges. The first pass scythes through a high bomber element, black puffs. A gout of flame from a starboard nacelle. A falling speck that becomes a tumbling fortress, trailing parachutes. In Lawson's ears, the interphone of another crew seems to bleed through. Imagined or real Feather 3, Feather 3. God, she's shaking drop tanks. Now, his hand snaps the jettison, and the Mustangs kick light as the 108-gallon tanks tumble backward, flashing once and vanishing into their own slipstreams. The Merlin's note sharpens without the parasitic drag. Blue flight goes line abreast, then splits into finger fours. Lawson shoves the throttle up to the gate. The airframe shivers, then settles as the prop bites thin air. The N9 gun sight ring steadies over a Focke-Wulf chewing through the bomber's high right. He comes in oblique, preserving energy, no turning duel. Not here, not now, just a slashing dive and out. The first burst is long and useless. Streaks of 50s vanishing into the bright. He corrects with a breath, not a thought. The second burst saws off the 190's starboard aileron. The enemy rolls, snaps a half-turn downward trailing glycol, then steadies. Pilot fighting for control. Splash, he's smoking Blue 4's voice. Thrilled and frightened, is in his ear. Lawson does not chase. He unloads to the deck of contrails, regains speed, and lifts the nose toward a 109 that is lined up on the tail of a straggling fortress. The Mustang hums, light and confident. 4 Brownings in each wing chewing the air. Tracers arcing past the 109's canopy. Closer, closer. The Messerschmitt flicks left into a high G barrel, and Lawson follows just enough to see the pilot. A cherry-red spinner. The white spiral a hypnotic blur. The 109 yaws with a boot full of rudder, rolls off, and runs downhill. Lawson lets him go. The discipline is different here. Protect the bombers, maintain altitude, conserve fuel. The target is Berlin, and Berlin still lies east under a veil of high haze. He pulls back to his flight, checks the gauges, manifold pressures steady, coolant in the green. Fuel good with the main, and reserve still fat, and slides back into their slot, high and right of the lead box. Below, the city's idea, Berlin. That word with a gravity all its own draws them onward. Over the radio, someone laughs, an edge of disbelief fraying the sound. Would you look at that? The voice says. We're going to Berlin in broad daylight. Lawson doesn't answer. He watches the contrails of the Luftwaffe's second wave, higher and more desperate, rising to meet a stream of bombers escorted by fighters that should have turned back an hour ago. The old math range rings and fuel loads, and hope has been erased by a metal heart with 2 impellers and the means to feed it all the way to the capital and home again. The next attack comes stacked and clever, a head-on pass to break the leading box. Then a rolling scissor from 10 o'clock high to draw the escorts away. Blue lead pushes them across the nose of the second bomber wing. A slewing move that keeps their guns between the Germans and the aluminum river. Lawson feels the Mustang's long legs and high-altitude lungs working under him. The Packard Merlin singing in a key the Zero could never reach. The Focke-Wulf could not hold for long. The sky brightens with muzzle flashes, then darkens with smoke. Berlin is close now. On the horizon, a low band of gray, cloud or city or both. The fortress formations tighten. The navigators plot the last straight line. Lawson hears a fragment from 1st Air Division Command, winds aloft verified, IP in 3. He swallows. The cold in his gloves is absolute. He thinks briefly of Leiston's muddy dispersals, of ground crew hands raw from safety wiring coolant caps, of the paper drop tanks stacked like barrels in a village storehouse. He thinks of the factory in Detroit that built the heart he is leaning on now, and of the men who mocked licensed engines until these engines carried the fight to the place where the Reich believed daylight could not go. Over the target, March 6, 1944. Berlin approaches as a smudge that hardens into chimneys. Rail yards, factory roofs, the bomber stream steadies into its final run. The air suddenly crowded with purpose. A murmur passes through the radio's navigators confirming initial point. Bombardiers arming nose fuses, waist gunners checking belts with cold, stiff fingers. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson slides his Mustang further out on the high right quadrant of the lead box, giving himself a cleaner line to slash at anything diving through. The city's flak belts come alive in layers low. Black carnations blooming at 12,000 tight gray bursts at 20,000 hard. White puffs at 26,000 where the escorts and high cover keep watch. The sky smells of cordite and antifreeze, though Lawson knows it's imagination. The oxygen mask gives you ghosts, flak, heavy, and accurate. The lead fortress calls, steady, steady. Below, the bombardier's world narrows to a Norden sight and a drifting city grid. Lawson banks momentarily to keep a pair of 109s, honest, yellow-nosed, fast, testing the edge of the formation, and feels the Merlin's two-stage lungs hold him aloft like a hand. At 2700 RPM and 36 inches of manifold pressure, the Packard V1653 purrs in a way the Allison never did up here. Somewhere in Detroit, men in oil-spotted aprons cut gears to tolerances you could feel with your fingernail. Somewhere in Derby, the blueprint curves of Rolls-Royce's supercharger stages were translated into gauges and jigs and torque wrenches. In Lawson's cockpit, all that becomes one sensation: pull and trust. Blue lead, tally 4 diving from 11 high. Lawson sees them WWII 190As in a shallow, murderous glide aimed at the second bomber wing. He pushes the throttle to the stop, nudges a touch of right rudder to keep the nose straight, and drops the Mustang's nose just enough to build one more 10 knots. The gun sight ring floats, then steadies as the geometry resolves. His first burst sails wide, tracers burying in a space the Focke-Wulf has already abandoned. He adjusts not with thought, but with a flyer's memory of what the airplane wants. The second burst finds a wing root. Panels flash away. The 190 wobbles. Then a canopy pops and a figure tumbles end over end. Too small for the size of the sky. Break, break. The radio goes sharp with overlapping calls. A head-on attack scythes through the lead box, cannon bursts like gray fists. A B-17's nose wrenched open as if by invisible hands. Lawson's mouth is dry. He resists the instinct to dive after killing blows. The brief is welded into him. Stay high. Keep speed. Shield the bombers. A 109 knifes through the contrails toward a straggler that's already trailing a thread of smoke. Lawson rolls the Mustang on its spine, pulls through a high G half-Cuban, and meets the Messerschmitt offset. Their closure rate makes the moment fugitive. He squeezes a half-second squirt, nothing, then a spark along the 109's spine. The German jerks past, close enough for Lawson to see the pilot's head snap. A white scarf blooming inside the canopy. The 109 dives away. Lawson does not follow. Bombs? Away. The words arrive calm, almost domestic, through the chaos. The lead elements pickle, then the wing, then the trailing box. A silver rain stepping across factory roofs and marshalling yards. The timing is clockwork, the American method, disseamed and standardized and repeated until it becomes habit. Bursts walk across the target area. A long shed lifts like a rug shaken free of dust. The rail yard buckles into black geometry. The flak grows frantic. In the curl of a white burst, a fortress takes a direct hit. The right wing shears at the root, and the bomber tumbles in its own smoke. A perfectly slow catastrophe. Shoots open 1, 2, 3, then nothing. Lawson feels the bite in his forearms as turbulence slaps the Mustang. He glances at coolant and oil temps still green, radiator door set to auto, and at the fuel selector main tank drawing, reserve untouched, drop tanks long gone. He listens for anything in the Merlin's note that would suggest trouble and hears only that insistent, alive hum. The sound that means he can go where the bombers go and still bring his men home. A year ago, that sound would have thinned and died west of the Rhine. Today, it is strong over Berlin. Blue flight. Rejoin. We shepherd them out. He counts his people 2, 3, 4, and slides back where he can see over the bomber's shoulders. Below, the city is a stipple of impacts and roiling smoke. High to the north, contrails weave like white snakes someone else's fight. For a moment, the sky opens and he can see it all, the river cutting the city, the wide rail yards like circuitry, the small, bright flashes of men trying to kill other men from miles away. He thinks of Leiston's dispersal again, of Crew Chief Staff Sergeant Red Hanley sipping tea from a chipped mug as he safety wired a coolant cap at dawn, of Hanley's ritual pat on the Mustang's cowl. "She'll sing for you today, Lieutenant." She is singing now. The Luftwaffe makes one more concerted push. This time they come in a rolling drag from high 6. Half a dozen 190s and 109s snapping down in pairs, leaking speed to bait the escorts, trying to pull the Mustangs into a turning fight away from the tall boxes of bombers. Blue Lead refuses the bait, pushes the flight laterally, across the nose and up sun, slicing the attack with angles instead of pure pursuit. Lawson picks the third pair, waits the extra heartbeat it takes for their path to intersect his, and then he pounces a short, disciplined burst that chews into an outer wing panel and opens the Focke-Wulf like a can. The German pilot bails immediately, the parachute blossoming clean and white. "Save ammo." Blue Lead warns, "Home is a long way." The remark cracks the tension like a joke that isn't one. Lawson checks his belts low on the left inboard gun and throttles back enough to hold position without scouring fuel. The bombers stream, lighter by more than anyone will admit over the radio. Tips west, flak thins around the edge of the city, then becomes random, then stops. Beyond the haze, the air turns the faintest shade warmer and the sun sits off their right shoulder, exactly where it should be for the trip home. Lawson glances down at his map case and sees the day in small, penciled lines climb. Rendezvous. The sweep east over the North Sea. The curve inland. The straight sword stroke to Berlin. And now the arc home. His glove hovers over the radio switch, then falls away. There is nothing to say that matters more than the Merlin's song and the sight in his right-hand mirror of Blue 4 holding position because Blue 4 believes Blue 1 will get him home. He tightens his harness, flexes numbed fingers, and lets the Packard heart pull them west. Contrails like chalk lines behind them on the cold blue slate. The running fight west, March 6th, 1944. Western edge of Berlin's flak belt, 25,000 feet and falling to 24. The bomber stream has turned for home, stepping down a hair to nurse engines and contain damage. Contrails fray in the afternoon sun. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson eases the prop back 100 RPM, resets mixture, and lets the Packard Merlin settle into a steady, tireless drone. Fuel math becomes a low thrum in the back of his mind. Mains good, reserve untouched, drop tanks long gone. The brief had been clean escort all the way in, all the way out. But everyone knows that egress is when wolves get bold. Blue Lead to Blue Flight take top cover 2,000 above one box. We're their roof. Lawson's 4 ship lifts as one. Small adjustments of trim and pitch. Below, a B-17 with a ragged right wing limps along, tail guns twitching at ghosts. A P-47 from the 56th Fighter Group ducks in close, waggles, and slides away on its own fuel calculus. Far aft, a black smudge grows the spoor of engines under stress, and then the Luftwaffe is back. Not in a single wave, but in clever threads, pairs and fours, climbing from dispersal strips, trying to time intercepts along the stream's westering path. Debden red to all. Bogies 3 o'clock, high and hot. Blakesley's voice again, iron and quick. Lawson turns his head and sees them FG-190As with defense bands, BF-109G6s bristling at the cowl, and worse 109s carrying underwing 21 WWII. GUR, 21 rocket tubes. The Luftwaffe's blunt instrument for breaking up a box. The first salvo blooms ahead of a low squadron of fortresses, two white smears that become wobbling contrails, then exploding suns. The formation staggers, then tightens, discipline snapping back like a rubber line stretched to breaking. Blue 2. You see those rocket tubes, Lawson calls, keeping the edge out of his voice. A firm, ugly bastards. Take the heavies. I'll spoil the setup. He nudges the nose down, just enough to harvest speed without losing his altitude cushion. The Merlin's two-stage supercharger holds its song at 26 inches and 500 RPM. The engine feels like a hand on the small of his back, pushing him exactly where he wants to go. He picks the pair lining up a second rocket run. The lead 109 rides his sight for a half-breath too long. Lawson taps a short burst. Tracers sow across the right wing route. The German jolts, yaws, and the rocket tubes tear away, tumbling like bricks. The wingman breaks hard into the sun. Lawson resists the lure to follow. He unloads, regains airspeed, and slides back to his gatekeeping slot. Bombers, keep it tight. A group leader says, voice dry as paper. We're on the long road now. The long road means channels, headwinds that grow tricky over the North Sea, and formations that must stay whole to stay safe. It means more attempts cutting passes, vertical jabs, angry one-ship dives by pilots who know the Reich is bleeding and are willing to spend themselves to make the Americans pay for the daylight arrogance of Berlin. A year ago, the math worked for them. Escorts would run dry near the frontier. Gunners alone would face fresh attacks. Today, Mustang contrails write a different proof in the winter sky. They come again out of the north, high and rolling, trying to drag the Mustangs into a turning fight away from the stream. Blue lead refuses the geometry. Cross the nose, don't chase. We play angles, he says. The cadence almost conversational. Lawson obeys the method slide across, threaten with speed, force the German to choose between a clean attack or a safe egress. He squeezes twice, disciplined, and watches a Focke-Wulf jink out of a firing solution he knows would have been a kill if he'd followed the gut instead of the brief. He thinks of Hanley's morning pat on the cowl. Bring her back. Bring them back. A voice breaks in, tight and young Blue 4. I'm hit. Lawson's neck tightens. Say again. 4 coolant temp rising took a nick in the radiator. I think I can hold altitude for now. The Merlin's lifeblood glycol can vanish through a pinhole. Auto door to manual, set half open. Watch your temps. Stay with me. Roger. They step down 1,000 to ease the load. Lawson pulls a gentle cover arc around Blue 4, watching the needle creep but hold. Below, the second wing of fortresses glows amber in the sun, aluminum turning warm as the day tilts west. A lone parachute hangs under them, drifting like a dandelion seed toward quilted fields. For a long minute, the radio empties, a silence made of concentration. Then word filters across networks like a slow tide Berlin hit. Multiple industrials burning. No cheers, just breath in the throat mics, a steadier hand on throttles. The Luftwaffe makes one last try near the visor. 4 190s slip in low, almost lost in the bomber shadow, and then pop up in a synchronized snarl at the tail of a battered low squadron. Lawson is already moving down and forward to put his guns between teeth and throat. He fires a defensive rake more to disrupt than to kill. Then watches 190 over-rotate, wings flashing high to show black crosses before he knifes away. A second stays a heartbeat too long, and Pei's Blue 2's burst walks in from the spinner to canopy. The German peels over trailing debris, and a dark speck pops free, chute opening a beat later, white and fragile against the deepening blue. Save your belts. Blue lead warns again. Channel weather says scattered 5/10. Home plate is wet. Wet means low clouds and a greasy runway. The kind of end-of-day trap that takes what the enemy could not. Lawson thumbs the mixture richer, checks the oxygen feed, runs a finger across the fuel selector by habit. He lets the Mustang creep a wing's breadth closer to Blue 4. How's that needle climbing slower? She'll make it. Lead? You'll make it, Lawson corrects, and means it. The North Sea hoves up as a steel sheet under a paling sky. Contrails thin. The bomber stream loosens minutely as crews taste home in their mouths like a remembered meal. English coast in 20. Lawson finally exhales all the way to empty, then draws in a lungful of mask cold air that feels like something you have to earn. The Merlin's note deepens with the descent, a baritone contentment that vibrates through boots and harness into bone. He pictures Leiston's concrete, the control van, the caravan warm smell of tea and hot oil, and Hanley's grin that always arrives before the engine stops. He pictures a chalkboard by the ops hut and the space where not every tail number will be rubbed clean. Blue flight, push button A, tower. This is blue lead, 4 returning, 1 nursing coolant. Leiston answers with clipped vowels and a calm he has learned to trust. Pattern is busy but open. Weather moving in from the north as promised. The bombers fan south and north to their own fields, a migration of battered birds. Lawson levels at 15,000, coaxes a little more warmth into the cockpit, and feels the first loosening in his shoulders since the IP. A black shape, another Mustang, slides by on the left. Canopy flash, revealing a face he doesn't know. The pilot lifts 2 fingers. Lawson returns it. A brief benediction in the fast, cold air. They cross the coast with the sun low. A bright nail hammered into the western horizon. England spreads below in hedges and lanes, smoke rising from hearths. A world impossibly ordinary beneath the high, hard business of the day. Lawson glances back once, at the chalked ghosts of their contrails unraveling behind them, and forward again, at the green fields that mean fuel lorries and safe hands and a line chief who will crawl under a hot cowl to make sure tomorrow's math still works. Home plate wet runways and quiet math. March 6th, 1944. Leiston, Suffolk airfield under low cloud and spit rain. The pattern is crowded, and the light is draining from the day when Blue Flight slips in at 1,200 feet with flaps hanging and radiators gaping like gills. The Merlin's note drops to a rolling growl as Lieutenant James Tex Lawson throttles back on downwind. England below is green and brown and glistening. Hedgerows beaded with water. Beyond the field, a thin line of surf shows white under a slate horizon. Tower calls the wind with clipped calm, 220 at 12. Gusting 18, and Lawson can picture the controller's cap tilted just so. Pencil tucked behind his ear, the practiced poise of a man who counts ships home. Blue 4. You're number 2, Lawson says, eyes cutting between the runway and the rearview mirror. Keep it shallow. Don't cook that coolant. I've got her. Comes the answer. Taut but steady. Temps holding. Lawson turns base. Props full fine. Mixture rich. Rain needles the canopy and smears the runway lights into small stars. The Mustang floats a breath longer than he wants, then settles on mains with a chirp that he feels in his knees. Tail comes down clean, no skip. He lets the airplane run, a low rumble over concrete, and taps the brakes twice as if not to startle a skittish animal. To the left, another P-51 rolls out, Merlin coughing at idle. To the right, a pair of P-47s from another group lumber past. Tired giants with oil streak down their flanks. The field smells of wet earth and hot glycol, a winter stew of war. Blue one down, Lawson calls, and eases aside at the first turnoff. Blue 4's voice is all discipline now, final, short, touching. A silver-gray blur arrives on 3 points. Waggles once as a gust fingers the tail, then holds. The canopy slides back before the Mustang is fully slowed. An arm lifts in a small fist as if to prove the pilot is still there. Lawson's throat loosens. "Nice and easy," he says, more to himself than the radio. When Blue 2 and Blue 3 roll in behind, Lawson finally lets go of the yoke and realizes his right hand aches from the long grip of the day. Dispersal is a village of mud and purpose. Crew Chief Staff Sergeant Red Hanley is already running alongside. Cap backward, coveralls soaked to a darker blue. He pats the cowl twice. The ritual that makes Lawson smile even before the prop is spooled down. "She sing for you," Hanley shouts over the fading blade wash. She sang. Lawson says, lifting his mask, the air tastes of rain and oil and tea from somewhere. Hanley's men swarm the airplane chocks in. Safety pins, a crouched corporal peering under the wing at a line of 50 cal scorch, left inboards light, he says, and reaches for a grease-blackened rag with a reverence that looks like affection. Intelligence is a Nissen hut with maps tacked to undulant walls and a kettle that never quite boils. Jackets hang on chairbacks like shed skins. The men trickle in, damp and bright-eyed. The shine not joy, but the afterglow of having threaded a narrow isthmus without falling into the sea on either side. The S2 waits with chin resting on knuckles, pencil poised. He has the day's plot traced in grease pencil coast in. Rendezvous. The long sword stroke. The turn over the target. Coast out. Pushpins stand in dense clusters over the Erkner and Oranienburg works, over rail yards, over the narrowed throat of the bomber stream where flak rings bite deepest. Coffee on the stove, he says, as if discussing a church social. Claims first. Lawson feels the weight of the board. Claims are a currency they don't spend lightly anymore. 1 Focke-Wulf probable, he says. 109 damaged. Fired to disrupt. Stayed high. Witnesses Blue 4 saw the Focke-Wulf stream glycol. Canopy off before the roll. S2 nods. Writes, dots an eye. We'll marry it against gun camera. He doesn't look up. How did the rocket tubes look clumsy but close? They're using them to break boxes. Not to chase. We cut one loose. An eyebrow rises. Copy? We'll pass that to division. The room tilts subtly when the first losses are spoken aloud, tail numbers without voices. Simple as the scratch of a pencil and as heavy as a bell. No ceremony, just arithmetic. A name catches and hangs. Someone clears his throat and says the name again, cleanly, as if doing it right might change the tally. The bombers took it harder still. No one pretends otherwise. But the map on the wall tells its own storylines that begin at English fields, cross a cold sea, and reach a city that was supposed to be beyond the reach of daylight fighters. They went there. They fought there. They came back with gas in their tanks and enough ammunition to be stingy at the end. The doctor comes and goes, checking frost nip, Bandaging a knuckle torn by a gun sight at high G, a runner sets a tray of tin cups by the stove, steam rising in puffs like breath on a cold morning. Someone begins to laugh and then stops. The noise embarrassed him, as if he had spoken in church. In the pause, the rain on the corrugated roof becomes very loud. "We'll do it again," the S2 says. And it is not bravado, but schedule. Weather 2 days out suggests a window. Later, in the dark outside dispersal, Lawson stands under the wing with Hanley and listens to rain tick on aluminum like 1,000 careful fingers. The chief runs through the airplane's needs patch where the flak peppered the radiator door. Swap the tired left inboard 50-bore sight, the N9, check the oxygen coupling that felt sticky at altitude. "And sir," Hanley adds softly, almost shy in the gloom, "we're trying a tighter tolerance on the supercharger drive. Packard sent guidance. We'll blue-check the gear lash." He taps the cowl with 2 knuckles. "That heart stays sweet. You go where the heavies go." That's the whole trick, isn't it? Lawson thinks of a factory floor he's never seen, the one in Detroit, where men in flat caps hold micrometers to gears and insist on 10,000ths, even when the foreman says 5 will do. Of derby drawings translated into numbers an American jig borer can read in its steel bones. Of a line of P-51 Bs and Cs at Inglewood and Dallas, waiting for the same heart to be wheeled under their noses and bolted on like a promise. He thinks of a date scratched into a battered pilot's kneeboard, March 6, 1944, and how it will look when someone reads it a year or 20 years from now. "Yeah," he says at last. That's the trick. From the mess, a radio plays faintly a song not quite heard over the rain. Somewhere. A ground crewman laughs too loudly, the way men laugh when they have just watched another man's parachute open. Lawson leans a shoulder against the warm metal and lets the warmth move through flight jacket, through cotton, into skin. He doesn't name the feeling. He doesn't have to. Tomorrow, the line chief will stencil another tiny swastika under an exhaust stack, or he won't. Tomorrow, the board will list a new target, or weather will keep them on the ground. Tonight, the field smells like wet grass and hot engines and tea. Tonight, the arithmetic of range and time has been proven on the cold slate of the sky. He closes his eyes and hears the Merlin Idol in memory, steady, assured, a British song sung with a Detroit accent. The realization, a British song in a Detroit key, March 7th, 1944. Leiston, Suffolk pre-dawn, frost silvering the Marston matting. The field is a low murmur of generators and men's breath, of trucks moving like dark beetles with hooded lamps. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson stands with a mug of tea that's gone lukewarm in his glove, watching his Mustang crouch under floodlight the color of old pewter. Crew Chief Staff Sergeant Red Hanley has the cowl already open to the morning from inside the V-1650's bay. A mechanic's torch plays across gears and linkages, revealing teeth that shine as if each had been polished by a jeweler. On the bench sits a micrometer the men treat like a reliquary. "Drive lash is good," Hanley says softly, as if telling a secret. "We set it to the new spec. Packard's bulletin says you can feel it with your fingernail if it's right." "You can feel that?" "Sir," he guides Lawson's finger to the edge of a gear. The metal is warm from the torch. The gap is not a measurement so much as a sensation exactly right. Lawson thinks of last night's rain, of Berlin's gray shock still in his muscles, and of the arithmetic that made it possible: two-stage, two-speed supercharger, intercooler, tight tolerances that meant the engine kept breathing where the air quit being friendly. Men once laughed at licensed engines. He recalls a scoff born of pride and ignorance both. But the laugh had died somewhere between Detroit's East Grand Boulevard and a row of Mustangs idling at Leiston. between a Rolls-Royce drawing and a jig borer in an American plant cutting steel to a British curve. "Sir," Hanley says, rummaging in a canvas satchel and producing a grease-spotched sheet. "Packard sent the latest. Fuel at 150 grade may clear in theater. Word is limited. If group authorizes, we'll bump your boost." Lawson's eyebrows go up. "Higher manifold I. The books say it sings louder and climbs like a homesick angel. We'll mind the temps." Hanley looks almost shy, then grins. "It'll make Berlin feel closer." The day's schedule thuds onto the ops hut table with a weight that is mostly paper and a little fate. Weather is marginal but improving. Targets slated in red pencil feel less like orders than a promise that the new math is not a one-off miracle. In the corner, a pilot from Debden borrowed for a visit, and a briefing draws a neat spiral on a sheet of onion skin and speaks of the way range erases the enemy's timing. "They used to mass for the frontier punch," he says. Brown eyes bright with the memory of learning a new game mid-fight. Now they're guessing wrong. We are with the heavies when it matters. At Leiston's perimeter, a lorry clanks past hauling crates stamped with the blunt poetry of logistics. 50 cal ball. Spare parts, A. Fuel tank, external, laminated. Lawson remembers seeing a paper drop tank uncrated for the first time, layers of brown fiber, glued and resined. More barrel than bomb. A crewman had wrapped it with knuckles and laughed paper until a major pointed at a map of Germany and drew a circle that reached all the way to Berlin and back. The laughter became a nod, the kind that binds men to an idea. Leiston's perimeter gives way in the mind to other perimeters. The brick cathedral of the Packard plant in 1943, with skylights slashing daylight onto rows of engines. A foreman in a tie pointing to a clock with a second hand that moves like a whip. The line worker with a flat cap who sets a bearing and thinks not of Berlin, but of an inspection stamp that stands for pride. At Inglewood and Dallas, Mustangs march in rows inside high bay hangars where the smell is dope and doped fabric. Zinc chromate, oil, men's sweat. A hoist swings a V1650 into place and bolts meet threads as if they always meant to find one another. In Derby, an engineer in a rumpled suit marks up the curve of a supercharger stage and says, "Yes, if they can hold that tolerance. It will breathe to the tropopause, across an ocean. Packard holds it. Launch in 40, the duty officer announces. Berlin's weather is your weather by noon. Expect opposition at assembly and near the Weser." It is said as if ordering lunch. At the hard stand, the Mustang's canopy is open to the morning. Frost smokes off the fuselage where the heater truck's exhaust washes the skin. Lawson leans on the wing root and feels the give of aluminum, the way an airframe wears use like a favorite jacket. A black-painted stencil near the exhaust stacks shows small, neat crosses claims the crew will argue about because they are careful with truth. Because probable tastes so close to kill that the difference matters exactly. Hanley's hand appears again with safety wires and faith. "Let's see if she sings the same song," Lawson says, climbing the ladder. The cockpit greets him with smells he now associates with survival leather. Rubber, old sweat, gun oil. He checks the oxygen coupling, the stickiness from yesterday. Gon taps the face of the altimeter as if to remind it how to behave. The ground phone pops against his boot. Hanley's voice climbs up the cord. "Clear prop." The starter growls. The Merlin coughs, catches, and the V-12's 12-note chord settles into an idle like a feline purr under the skin of the airplane. Oil pressure climbs with the inevitability of dawn. Radiator door cycles through auto. Checks out. At 1,000 RPM, the engine smooths into the sound that warmed Lawson all night in memory assurance. Taxi is a procession of noses and tails and sun-blocked glances. Run-up confirms the numbers, mags good. Prop cycles. Superchargers shift smooth at the gate. The Type D gun sight's glass glows, faintly steady. When the tower clears them, Lawson's flight rolls 2 and 2. A matched pair of pairings, and the Mustangs lift their tails. Then their main wheels, like dogs shaking rain from fur. The runway drops. The hedges slide beneath as stripes of green and brown. England tilts and is gone under a gray lid. Blue flight. Form on me, lean and clean. Hanley says we've a sweeter drive lash than yesterday, so let's not waste his art. Clicks string along the radio, a chain of trust. The climb sets them into sun. The North Sea lies ahead, a cold coin. Behind. Leiston shrinks to a child's drawing runway, hut, dispersal loop, a few lines and a belief. The bombers are still climbing somewhere inland into stacks and rectangles. Lawson pictures their navigators' tables, their pencil lines, their crew chiefs with sleeves rolled. He feels the day gather weight, halfway to rendezvous. He tries the briefed higher boost for a breath, just a breath. The Merlin's tone climbs as if someone has lifted a lid from its lungs. His altimeter, his vertical speed indicator, and his chest agree on the same truth. He eases it back to climb power before the temp needles can wag. A promise is only useful if you can keep it all the way home. Remember Berlin, he says, not as a boast, but as orientation. Remember their timing. Don't chase, protect. Let the engine and the range do the work. We write the proof again. In the glass of his canopy, his own eyes look back bloodshot, focused. The Packard heart hums, British in invention, American in cadence. Ahead, contrails begin to appear like chalk lines drawn by an unseen hand. Far, far off. A thin smudge might be Berlin's weather, or only the way you see what you intend to strike. Blue lead to blue flight, this is our long fuse. He advances the throttle to the detent. The Mustang leans into the thin air and, without hurry, without any sense of strain, keeps climbing toward where the map ends and the day's argument begins. Rendezvous. Lighting the long fuse. Again, March 7th, 1944. Over the North Sea, eastbound at 18,000, climbing to 24. The morning is a hard blue bowl. The Mustangs of blue flight step upward in loose finger 4, contrails not yet fully formed, the air so clean it feels like an absence. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson checks his gauges as if reading a liturgy. Oil 8 coolant edging up nicely. Boost steady at climb power. The Packard V1650 hums as if last night's rain had washed grit from its bearings. In his ear, the network murmurs with assembly calls, a patient dance of vectors and altitudes. Buncher 7, 1st Division forming Angels 15, 2nd Division orbit complete. The beams and beacons, bunchers and splashers paint the sky with invisible geometry. The Americans fly inside that math as confidently as men walking a road they built themselves. Blue lead, Debden red. A clipped voice slips in on button B. We're stacked north. Taking the first up sun perch. Copy, red. Lawson answers, picturing Colonel Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group sliding into its habitual high slot like a chess piece that knows its square. They find the bombers stream west of the Dutch coast tiles of aluminum stepping northeast. The sun flashing in boxy facets. Contrails smearing behind the formations like chalk dragged by a child's careless hand. Lawson pushes up to take the high right quadrant of a lead box of B-17s, the angle that lets him slash and then climb back to position without losing the altitude crown. Blue 2 and Blue 3 settle like thoughts you don't need to look at to know they're there. Blue 4's voice, crisp and steady after the radiator scare yesterday. checks in with a calm that makes Lawson's shoulders loosen a fraction. Contrails 10 high. Blue 3 says, "Looks like they're hanging back. Let them hang." Lawson replies. We write the proof the same way angles, speed, patience. At 23,000, the Merlin finds its stride. Lawson experiments with the higher boost setting for a heartbeat. The note climbs. A deeper breath through the supercharger's throat. Then he falls back to the book numbers. The needle on the coolant temp does not so much as flutter. Somewhere in the bay under his feet. The supercharger gears that Hanley blue-checked last night mesh like prayer wheels. The first test comes head-on, as always. A probing set of BF-109s using the bomber boxes as anvil and their own nerve as hammer. The bombers hold formation like a ritual performed under a sword. Lawson angles across the nose of the lead box, presents speed and guns without spending either recklessly. His first burst is a trace line across empty space where a 109 in is about to be. The second nips at a spinner and forces the German to jink. The attack blunts. No chase. Climb. Reset. He tastes rubber through the mask, feels the tremor of 50 cals settling on their trunnions, and thinks, we're here at the moment they counted on us being gone. Radio discipline frays without breaking. Flak reports light over Zuiderzee. A calm voice notes. Another adds, expect heavies at Brunswick. The target this time is not the heart of Berlin, but arteries that feed it engine works, marshalling yards, catenary where trains hang their days. The stream bends toward the Weser. That's where the wolves wait. They rise out of the haze in layered threads, Franchise 190s on the high line, 109s beneath. Then a third element skulking level with the bombers like hyenas in grass. Lawson keys his mic. Blue flight. We'll peel the top thread. 2. Protect the box on the turn. He drops the Mustang's nose a tooth, trades altitude for energy with a miser's care, and meets the high line on the slant. The sight ring floats, and he refuses to rush it. The lesson of yesterday cinched into his muscles like a second harness. Short burst. An aileron flutters from a Focke-Wulf like a leaf torn by wind. The German skates out of the firing cone and the pair slides past, forced high and wide. The middle thread hesitates. Hesitation is the smallest victory that matters. Rockets 2 o'clock low, blue. 2 barks. Lawson sees them, a 109 with WFR. GAR, 21 tubes hanging like swollen limbs, easing up on a battered low squadron. I've got the tubes, he says. He drifts down without showing eagerness. Then kicks rudder and snaps a crossing burst. Tracers stitch the right wing route. The tubes tear away, ragged and tumbling, and the 109 peels off in a skid mud that speaks of a pilot surprised to be alive. Lawson does not watch him go. He's already climbing back to the slot. The Merlin's singing that effortless song that lets you be both guardian and hunter without losing the thread of either. The flak at Brunswick is punctual and practiced. Black flowers at 18. Gray fists at 22. Hard white knots right where Lawson flies. He feels the shock of air slapped out of density. The Mustang lifted by pressure waves into small weightlessness and then dropped back into its own wake. A stick of bursts walks between his flight and the bombers. And for an instant, you could imagine the flak gunners and the P-51 pilot see each other. Men looking up and men looking down. The line between them a few thousand feet and an arithmetic problem both are trying to solve. Steady, steady, the lead fortress says on button C. A low incantation over the Norden. The bombs go in long strides that look almost lazy from 24,000 feet. The ground leaps and then smokes like a damp field in winter. A box loses a ship, a wing snaps at the root. A quiet, perfect break, and shoots unroll like laundry in a wind. Lawson forces his eyes away. The Luftwaffe tries a coordinated drag to the south, classic and nearly elegant, designed to pull the escorts into a turn fight away from the stream. Blue Lead's voice cuts clean across their nose. No pursuit. We are a shield, not a sword today. Lawson obeys and feels. Again. The strangeness of power married to restraint. The Merlin wants to run. The airframe could carve a perfect arc and eat a 190s lunch in a two-turn dance. Not today. He flashes past a yellow-nosed 109, close enough to see the pilot's gloved hand hit the canopy sill as he banks. Lawson feels the old tug of the chase in his ribs, ignores it, and climbs back into place, where the bombers look largest and the enemy smallest. Egress. The stream bends west. The sky thins to clean blue again. Flak left behind like bad weather in a rearview mirror. The attacks don't stop, but they lose orchestration. Now it's brave men throwing themselves at a fact that has outgrown them. One last 190 tries to sneak up through prop wash and turbulence to bite a tail. Blue 4 voice steady. Temps good drops a wing and rakes the air between predator and prey with a line of red-laced tracers. The German breaks, shows his crosses, and falls away in a shallow arc that reads as exhaustion rather than fear. Fuel Lawson asks, green across, Blue 2 replies. Green, Blue 3, green and singing. Blue 4 adds, a smile hidden in the oxygen mask. The North Sea returns under their noses like a pewter plate. England is a smudge that becomes hedges and lanes. Lawson eases the prop back, listens to the engine tidy itself for descent, and allows his hand to fall from the throttle to the canopy sill, feeling cold plexiglass under glove. The day is not finished. There is weather over Leiston again, and pattern will be thick, and the board will chalk numbers none of them want to read. But in the arithmetic that decides whether bombers live or die at the far edge of range, the proof has been written twice now, in 2 days. In letters the Reich cannot pretend are weather. Blue flight. Lawson says, voice level, bring it home. The Mustang noses tip down a degree. The contrails unravel behind them like white thread, let go. The turning point, when timing broke the hunters, March 8, 1944. Leiston. Suffolk midday squalls drift like gray curtains across the field. The crews move under them as if between acts of a play, quick and purposeful. Voices tucked low. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson sits on an ammo crate outside the briefing hut. Flight jacket unzipped. Steam from a tin mug fogging his goggles. The canvas walls thrum with wind. Inside, a new board is propped against yesterday's map, Brunswick scratched out. A fresh grease pencil line curving toward the Ruhr. The war has a metronome now. It ticks at a rate set by engines and weather and the speed of men who have learned each other's rhythms. Gentlemen, the intelligence officer begins when they file in. The Germans are changing their timing. Expect later intercepts over the Weser and one more set along the return leg. He taps an annotated photo marshalling yards at Hildesheim. Catenary and sheds stark in winter light. Think arteries, not heart today. A hand goes up in the back Blue 4, face uncreased by anything but the last 2 days. Sir, reports from Debden say they're seeing more Werf granite rocket tubes hung under 109s. Correct. The S-2's pencil circles the margin. They're blunt instruments to tear boxes. Your instrument is range. Don't trade it for pride. Outside, on the hard stand. The Packard Merlin warms the way a craftsman warms his hands before lifting a blade from a wet stone, slow, practiced, precise. Hanley leans into the open cowl, listening with his fingertips against a line as if feeling a pulse. "Boosts there if they give you the nod," he tells Lawson quietly. We blue-check the gear lash again, sweet as a hymn. He grins sideways. Detroit sings in tune with Derby. They launch into a sky the color of gunmetal. Climb is a long, slow stair cut into the air. The Mustang's a blue flight, stepping up until the coast drops away behind and the North Sea lays flat and pewter. The rendezvous is tighter today. Bombers stacked with a discipline that looks like faith. Lawson slips into the high right quadrant again and feels the odd familiarity of it, as if he has been arriving at this exact angle for years. The bomber noses never stop vibrating. Men below him live inside that trembling world for hours. Trading jokes and oxygen, checking gloves, watching friends' ships and pretending not to count shoots when a wing snaps. Debden red up sun. Blakesley's voice threads through. "We'll pull the first teeth. Copy. Red." Lawson answers. "Blue will mind the roof." The first German attack is not clever, fast head-on slashes that leave smoking commas in the bomber's stream, but the second is. It comes as a drag maneuver off the south, a knotted curve of 190s that invites the escorts into a horizontally sprawling fight. Blue Lead sees it early, across the nose. He reminds, angles, not pride. Keep the altitude crown. Lawson obeys with a restraint that feels like muscle memory now. He skates their line over the bomber noses, a shield more than a spear, and waits for the moment the enemy must either dive to the deck or climb into guns. Two 190s pick the latter. Lawson's burst is short and without drama. One German shears off with a panel fluttering. The other, startled by a denial he expected to be a chase, breaks late and loses the geometry that would have made him dangerous. Over Hildesheim, flak is careful and mean. The boxes flex and hold. Bombs, away. Comes the calm over Button C, the same domestic tone that underlines violence like a note passed under a door. Sheds unfold. A yard buckles into black lattice. For a beat, the sky is all smoke and contrails and the white skeletons of parachutes. Lawson forces his eyes back to where they must stay. The high right corner of a bomber world that believes in him, the way he believes in the men who filed the supercharger gears to the thickness of a whispered oath. Egress west. The air grows thinner, cleaner, meaner. Here is where the Luftwaffe has shifted its bet, a late punch meant to catch Americans tired. Ammo light, thinking of coffee at Leiston. 4 109s with fat-tubed rockets ease up under a low squadron. Lawson calls it Blue 2, peel their tubes. 3, with me. He drops a wing, harvests speed with a miser's careful hand, and crosses the 109 pair at an angle that makes their aim silly. Short burst stitch at the root, and a tube rips free, tumbling like a log. The 109 jolts, late to the surprise. Blue 2 rakes the second pair in a tidy, almost classroom line. The rockets go nowhere important. The bombers keep breathing. Now, the killer go-home moment arrives, a cluster of 190s, desperate and brave. Commit to a high 6 run on a trailing box. It is the kind of attack that writes men's names on boards in the hut. Lawson feels the Merlin's patience with altitude and slides into their path 2 ship lengths ahead of where calculation says he must be. His first burst is nothing. His second is everything brief, disciplined, arcing across an outer wing, forcing a single, unnecessary correction from a German ace who has made too many perfect passes to expect a bad one now. The correction costs him speed. The correction saves a bomber. Fuel, Lawson asks, voice mild to hide his heart. Green, Blue 2, green, Blue 3, green, Blue 4. And sir, temp sweet. They hold that altitude crown all the way to the coast. The North Sea reappears. The light fattens into late day, and England smudges on the western lip of the world, like chalk on slate. Lawson sits a hair taller, not with triumph, but with the strange humility that arrives when an engine keeps its oath and the math on the wall turns into contrails and hulls and men back on concrete. Pattern is crowded again. Rain stripes the field. Lawson rolls out behind a pair from the 56th, watches a P-47 plant its big feet and wag its rudder like a tired dog. He settles, chirps, lets the Mustang run, brakes as if not to offend it. At dispersal, Hanley jogs alongside with that same backward cap, already reading the skin for hail the way a farmer reads a field. Boost behave, he asks, almost casual. Behaved? Lawson says, and then some. Hanley pats the cowl twice. A liturgy complete. Then we'll do it again. In the hut. Claims feel less like trophies than footnotes to a proposition that keeps proving true if the fighter can stay. The bomber can live. On the map. Pins march from East Anglia to names that once sounded like rumors: Berlin, Brunswick, Hildesheim and back. The S2 marks losses in a hand, without flourish. Silence settles like dust. Kinder than grief, but not kinder by much. Lawson steps back into the rain and tips his face to it, letting the cold needle his skin. He thinks not of aces or tallies, but of a gear tooth blue-checked at dawn, of laminated paper tanks stacked in a lorry, and a major's pencil tracing a circle that reached farther than a laugh could follow, of an engine that sang in a British key with a Detroit accent. He doesn't name the moment, because naming it would make it too small. He simply breathes, and the breath fogs and vanishes and is replaced by another. Tomorrow there will be a new line on the board. Tomorrow the Luftwaffe will try a different timing. Tomorrow Hanley will guide Lawson's finger to a fresh tolerance and ask, "Feel that," and Lawson will, because the war has become a thing, felt in fingertips and forearms and the hollow over the sternum, where fear sits and where, on days like this, it moves aside for a steadier weight. The realization that the long fuse is lit not by speeches, but by gears that fit and fuel that burns, and men who do the next right thing, exactly on time. The proof on the wall. Berlin, again March 9th, 1944. Leiston. Suffolk gray dawn rubbed thin by a wind off the sea. The ops hut chalkboard looks like a score settled in long. Straight strokes route lines scissoring the North Sea. Assembly orbits. A sword stroke inland. The word Berlin sits on the right-hand margin. Not as a dare now, but as a place you plan for, like fuel stops in weather. Lieutenant James Tex Lawson sips at tea that never quite gets hot enough and studies the wind arrows as if they are adversaries. In the corner, the S2 flips through photo prints still wet at the edges, rail spurs kinked, shed roofs peeled back like tin toys, smoke boiling in fat black ropes. A corporal pins a fresh weather map next to yesterday's. The day looks marginal and possible, which is to say, a day for flying. Gentlemen, the intelligence officer begins, pencil poised over Brunswick and then sliding to the right until it taps near Erkner. Expect heavy flak at the belt and smart harassing attacks from JG-11 and JG-1. Reports suggest later intercepts on the return. He looks up, finds Lawson's squadron commander. We stay with the boxes. If they try to drag you, answer with geometry, not heat. No one laughs. No one has to. The rule lives in their hands now, not on the board. At dispersal, Crew Chief Staff Sergeant Red Hanley has the cowl open and the micrometer out like a priest lifting a relic. "She's the same sweet song," he says. guiding Lawson's fingertip to the tiniest whisper of gear lash on the supercharger drive. Boost authorities there if group clears it. We'll mine temps. Paper tanks are topped scent of glue enough to hurt your head. He grins. Detroit and Derby say, go. Taxi, run up. The quickening underfoot as the pack of Mustangs steps onto the runway, 2 by 2, and lifts. Tails first, then Maine's men leaving Earth with the practiced grace of men who intend to come back and have made the airplane complicit in that intention. Climb is through a weather shelf that smears the canopy and leaves the world below painted in watercolor. At Angels 20, the air is clean as a scalpel. Lawson checks the numbers oil 85 coolant green. Manifold 35 prop at 2700 and tastes rubber through the mask like a ritual that tells the body it is safe to be afraid. They find the bombers stream north of the Zuiderzee, a slow armada of aluminum. Boxes stacked in steps. Contrails smudging into one long white river. Lawson slides Blue Flight into the high right quadrant of a lead box like a chess piece returning to its square. Blue 2. Mine the low element. 3. Watch for tubes. The replies come clipped and calm. Over button B. Debden's voice drifts in tight and dry. Red is up, son. We'll take first nibble. Lawson flashes on a picture he's never seen: a German controller in a field hut tapping a grease pencil against a plexiglass plot as dots slide toward a city he swore would never see daylight bombers over its chimneys. First contact is a head-on that feels like old film 109s, slashing the nose of the lead box with cannon flash winks. A fortress shuddering, stabilizer ragged like a torn flag. Lawson's correction is muscle and breath. He scythes across the approach, throws a short burst to make an angle ugly, refuses the chase. Climb, reset. The Merlin's 2-stage lungs keep the airplane buoyed in thin air like a gull riding a pressure wave. The second wave is smarter, WWII rolling in from high 10 with a drag that invites long, flat pursuit away from the stream. Blue Lead's voice is a level line, across the nose. Don't spend altitude for pride. Lawson obeys the catechism. His burst nips a panel. The German corrects. Late, and the pass blunts to a sulky tangential. The bombers keep their cadence. Flak at the belt is late winter mean black flowers at 18. Gray fists at 22. Hard white cotton at 26, where the escorts live. Lawson rides the bumps with a loose hand, the way you don't fight wake because the air always wins. Steady, steady, comes the lead bombardier. A calm inside a storm. Bombs step off in a rhythm that's almost kind. A marshalling yard lifts and unravels. A boil of smoke begins its slow sprawl into the afternoon. Rockets, low 2, blue 3 snaps. Lawson looks and sees the ugly underwing tubes again. A 109 easing into a firing position on a mauled, low squadron whose right outer ship is already smoking. He trims 2 clicks, nose down. Harvests 10 knots without losing that altitude crown, and crosses the 109's nose with a short, contemptuously neat burst. The right tube peels like fruit skin. The pilot yanks away and shows his belly. Blue 2 turns the second pair with a dry, economical rake. The rockets go harmless into the cold sky. Somewhere, a gunner says, "Thank you, Jesus," in a voice only his interphone hears. Egress west. This is where, 2 months ago, arithmetic ate Americans fuel thin. Escorts turning back. Wolves waiting fresh at the edge of the belt. Today, contrails of P-51s still right across the sky above and beside the boxes like chalk lines you can trust. The Luftwaffe gives them one last test, 6 190s in a high 6 run. Coordinated enough to be beautiful if it weren't meant to kill friends. Lawson slides early. an angle that makes their geometry a little wrong. His first burst is nothing. His second is a comment at the wing root that forces a single unnecessary correction from a pilot who has made a career of perfect passes. The correction saves a bomber. The correction spends a German. Blue 4, voice steady, adds a half-second squirt to keep the rest honest. The attack dissolves into individual acts of bravery without momentum. Fuel Lawson asks, green, blue 2, green, green, and singing. Blue 4 says, and Lawson can hear Hanley's grin in the phrase. The North Sea lays out under them like slate. England grows from smudge to coastline, to hedges and lanes, and small plumes of domestic smoke. Lawson lets the prop bite a touch less air, listens to the Merlin tune itself to descent, and feels a loosening from shoulder to wrist as if someone has stepped out of a room. Pattern is stacked, weather is sullen, but the sequence flows flaps, gear, cheeks tight against a crosswind that tries to make mischief. Wheels chirp, tail settles. The Mustang runs out its last speed and then is only an airplane on a wet English field among dozens, hundreds of others. In debrief, the map is crowded with pins and string, and the kind of silence that isn't absence but a lid on something hot. Claims go into the ledger like careful footnotes. Losses are written with a pencil that never seems to dull. The S2 marks Berlin with a small tick that means today too. On a side table, a clerk totals numbers none of the pilots asked to see. The arithmetic of the last week is a slope on a chart somewhere in 8th Air Force headquarters, bombers getting home more often, fighters burning more fuel over Germany than over England. German fighters arriving later, in fewer numbers, making worse trades. A slope that says something is breaking that cannot be unbroken by courage alone. Night comes early. Lawson stands with Hanley under the wing, rain ticking on aluminum like fingernails on a table. How's she feel, Hanley asks, which is his way of asking, how do you feel? Honest, Lawson says. Like she'll do exactly what we ask if we ask clean. Hanley taps the cowl twice, the little blessing. Then we ask clean again tomorrow. Across the field, a generator coughs to life. Lights bloom, and somewhere a radio drips out a tune you can't quite hear. In the hut, the bored man wipes Berlin with a damp rag and writes it again. Not bigger, not with flourish, just with a steadier hand, outside. The Packard heart cools under its metal skin. A British song in a Detroit key, waiting for morning.